Where's Die Steen is the 5th episode of Transformers Animated Season 3, 34th overall, and originally aired March 29th, 2009.
A robot in disguise swaps metal with a double agent who is really on the level.
The episode opens with the Elite Guard after 10 episodes looking for Wasp in the Earth sector. Longarm isn't thrilled that no one told him, Magnus apologizes, and clearly the bots on Earth are on top of this. Meanwhile, on a rainy day, B is playing a fighting game which has a surprising amount of references to Hasbro stuff. It's called Ninja Gladiator because B is clearly playing Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe. He's fighting this really cool robot which is based off of Antron or Antron from Micronauts. And they're fighting in front of Twerk 3 from G1. So this has to be the Hasbro fighting game. Big Boss is upset that B was on the screen, not the screen he was assigned to, and well, look, now we got a problem. So the team heads out, but B wasn't told what screen to look out again. The elites arrive, and they don't know what rain is. Kind of like another Cartoon Network show would do later. And also, Sentinel cannot drive in the rain, which is a detail I absolutely love. Plenty of people do struggle with driving in the snow and rain, and this is a detail we don't really see in Transformers, a Transformer struggling to drive in a pretty standard way. At most, they'll just get stuck in the mud or something. Wasp has somehow made it to Earth and cut the power. That is pretty funny that B's first thought is Optimus cut the power. The emergency red lights kick on. I like the detail that all the other glowing things still glow without the red. And Wasp is here to get revenge for B ruining his life.
About that. Funny story. Turns out it was all a big misunderstanding.
Longarm set me up. Derek set you up. Actually, set us up. We're both just victims here, right?
Buddy?
B's able to get the call out before he gets zapped. Wasp has this epic monologue about how B really did just ruin his life with a misunderstanding. It's pretty devastating and you kind of feel for him even if he is doing wrong by it. Tom Kenny as Wasp is great, even though he does sound a little too much like Stitch in a serious scene.
Bumblebot know what like to lose everything and have every bot turn on Bumblebot.
Wasp takes off his helmet and we only really get a good shot of it without the red filter on for like a second. So here's the concept. B blacks out and he wakes up to everyone being oddly long, but also B, huh? Wasp swap their voices as well as their head and paint jobs like a Hasbro toy. That is a pretty clever use of the fact that most Transformers are repaints of each other. Nice detail that Wasp has a rub sign like Lockdown, so when he repaints B, they just blacked out his logo. And I really like that their voices swapped, so now Bumper has to do the Wasp accent, and Tom is speaking normal with Wasp's voice. I never really liked it in body swap episodes where their voices stayed the same. This is way more interesting. The bots recognize that B has his visor down for some reason and he's talking funny, but they don't recognize that his eyes are now purple. But before Ratchet can use tiny stasis cuffs on B, he starts blasting and escapes. The others transform and roll out right into Sentinel and Jazz. Sentinel's oddly shaped logo recap that they're hunting for the Decepticon spy. But he may or may not be a Decepticon spy, right B? And he's like, I don't know. We get a double transform and roll out. But Wasp stays behind on the base. Meanwhile, on Cybertron, Shockwave is trying to send a message to Megatron, but leaves a voicemail saying that he's got the final solution. Back on Earth with very nice lighting. Who's that? Damn AK interactive paint is too sticky. Then he gets jumped by two jet guys that have wind and firepower. Ratchet and Prime show up, but not before the Wind One accidentally blows B away. I should just reveal right now they're Jetfire and Jetstorm. Storm is Phil, Tom is Fire, they have Storm and Fire powers. Their characterization and vaguely European accents are based off of Steve Martin and Dan Aykroyd as the wild and crazy guys on SNL.
Jorg, my brother, there will certainly be a lot of swinging in our bachelor pad tonight. Hold it. Let's catch some rays!
Totally didn't do an impression of Jetfire and Jetstorm as a kid to the point where even today I'll accidentally kind of talk like them.
It's time to double up!
So yeah, they're also a two-team combiner. Transformer Synthwave, Grid Pattern in orange and blue. Two uses of the blast effect. And oh yeah, they're split down the middle, so they're like Metal Hero slash VR Trooper, or it's Kamen Rider Double, Heat Trigger. But actually, their design was directly based off of a kind of sister series to Transformers, Brave, which is kind of like if Super Sentai and Transformers had a kid. The most famous is their final series, the King of Braves, Gao-Gai-Gar. One of the robots in the series is Choryujin, who's a combiner of two brother robots that have weather powers, and they form two halves of the combiner, except for the blue one has water power instead of wind. So yeah, the combiner smacks Ratchet down, and he fights Optimus for a minute until Sentinel shows up and explains that they're Jetfire and Jetstorm and part of the Elite Guard. Guess Optimus and Ratchet didn't see the logos on their hips that ended up on the combiner's shoulders. Ratchet's confused that Autobots don't fly, but Sentinel says that they were able to make them recently because they captured Starscream. A comic book was included in their 2-pack that goes into greater detail about Storm and Fire being robots that were upgraded to become flyers, but even with it, it still kind of accidentally implies that either the Autobots are so incompetent that Starscream was their first Decepticon they captured, or are so bloodthirsty they immediately kill and melt down any Decepticon they captured, and raises the question of how did the Decepticons learn the ability to fly?
Use fly! But he has wings. It's not like I'm trying to teach it to a freaking monkey. Woo, PG! Yeah!
Meanwhile, Wasp is playing games until he gets bored and goes through the Autobot search history. Bee tries painting himself with mustard, but like most yellow paints, it has terrible coverage. Bulkhead and Prowl find him, but Bee's able to get through the Bulkhead by reminding him, even with a clip from Auto Boot Camp, about how Bulkhead dropped a building on Sentinel and Bee took the fall for it. Jet and Jet find them, and they don't really get the situation, so this leads to them fighting, and Sentinel shit driving.
Prowl, Bulkhead, step away from Wasp.
Oh, it's okay, he's Bumblebee. I know because I pushed a wall on Sentinel and he told me.
Nice face, Sentinel.
I don't care! Arrest them all and let Ultra Magnus sort them out!
Apparently, Jeff Bennett said this as a joke in Season 1, and they thought it was so funny they decided to put it in the show. It's a play on the phrase, kill them all and let God sort them out. A phrase said in the Crusades in southern France, but the Crusaders couldn't tell the difference between the normal Catholic French and the heretical, feminist, pacifist, Gnostic Cathars. So they just slaughtered everyone. They make it back to the base, and Wasp recaps Auto Boot Camp and what Bee did. But the most important day in Wasp's life was just Tuesday to Sentinel, and he doesn't really remember or care. He also looked up about the human villains, and we don't have enough time to do a race, so the two are going to play a video game. Until Wasp says, screw it. They're really going through light bulbs in this episode. Wasp manages to escape, and we see what Bee looks like without his helmet. Kind of like Prime's Bee. And yeah, he was still wearing the helmet in the far shot. And it turns out the paint was actually a button in the helmet somehow. The voices switched, I don't know. Meanwhile, on Cybertron, Ironhide walks in to find that Ultra Magnus was severely messed up by Shockwave and he stole the hammer. And despite the fact that Ironhide was intended to be a main character in Season 4, this is the last time he will have a speaking role. I wonder if he was originally supposed to be Cliffjumper in this scene. Either way, great episode. It's a very clever use of the body swap plot, and much like how the episode says, you almost feel bad for Wasp even if he's doing this. Sentinel and Optimus are always fun. The atmosphere of the episode is great. The rain, the lighting is so good, even though Detroit feels a little empty without many people around. Plus, it's a very important episode because it has Shockwave finally getting revealed to the people on Cybertron and he has to escape, with what he did to Sentinel being very important for the rest of the show. Jetfire and Jetstorm are fun characters, but they don't really add much to the episode. Overall, 10 out of 10. I love Jetfire and Jetstorm's designs. They're just so sleek and unique and look like they're wearing leotard shorts. Their concepts were first thought up by the guy who makes Spectacular Spider-Man even before animated really got off the ground. Then Derek kind of did his own touch to it. I love their different heads, with Jetfire having unique yellow eyes, and his head kind of looks like he's wearing goggles and helmet. Jetfire has always been one of my favorites, and he's always allowed to be a little different. Honestly, this might even be my favorite Jetfire design. Well, Jetstorm is kind of a placeholder name for random Transformers, his only real character being from Beast Machines, which yes, his head was inspired by the Beast Machines design. Always love combiners, and they combine in a very unique way, being like down the middle and one leg becomes an arm and their robot mode arms become just back things. The asymmetrical details on the head is fun. I really like the Choryu Jin reference. I've been keep calling it just the Combiner because the name's a little controversial. Originally they wanted to call it Firestorm, which makes sense. But they ran into problems because DC has a character named Firestorm. You wouldn't think there would be a problem because Transformers was still airing on Cartoon Network at the time, but Transformers is the flagship franchise of Hasbro, and DC was at the time still owned by Mattel, and that was, like Disney and Warner. So I guess Stormfire didn't sound good enough, and Skyfire still had its own problems since G1, so they decided to give him the very generic name of Safeguard. Something that Derek really was not a fan of. Which is also kind of ironic, because in G1, Jetfire was originally named Skyfire, but the toy had to be sold as Jetfire because of copyright stuff. Jetfire and Jetstorm really aren't an example of Hasbro forcing a gimmick onto a show. They're kind of more like, hey, can you please do this? And the crew eventually worked out what they should do with them. Another connection is around the same time, DC's Batman the Brave and the Bold had Firestorm in it, who are, in fact, two guys who become one. A nerdy guy played by Chris from Everybody Hates Chris, and a coach played by Bill Bulkhead himself. Which in itself might also be a reference to Bill's biggest role outside of Patrick Star being as a character on the '89 show Coach. But let me know your guys' opinions down below, as well as hitting that like button and the subscribe button if you're new. I had the Jetfire Jetstorm 2-pack as a kid, still wish I had it. And as a kid, I really wanted to be like the two of them with my older brother, but we were never really close and we didn't really like any of the same things, or really none of my family liked any of the same thing I was into.